For a closer look at this, I'm joined by Rafael Carranza, a U.S.-based reporter covering immigration issues. Rafael, thank you so much for joining our program today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Rafael, let's start with some reports saying that the U.S. is preparing for a rise in these migrant children entering the country. Can you talk about what is exactly triggering this expected influx, and how is the White House preparing for it?
And this rise in the number of children is within kind of like an expected rise of migrants overall. If we think about it, there have been restrictions along the southern border between the United States and Mexico since March 2020, when the pandemic forced the countries to go into lockdown, and so they implemented a series of restrictions that essentially shut down all access to asylum or legal entry for migrants into the United States. And so since then, those rules and have been implemented, have been kept in place, namely Title 42, which is a rule that allows U.S. government officials to turn away any migrant that arrives to the border, regardless if they have any asylum claim. And so just looking at it that way, since those restrictions have been in place since March 2020, there's been a very large backlog of migrants that have been waiting in Mexican border cities since then. And contributing to that, once Biden took office and showed a bit more of an approach that was a bit more open to or humane towards migrants, that also kind of elicited some other more interest from more migrants to make their way up to the border. So once you had the backlog and you had even more migrants then coming after Biden took office, that is believed to be contributing to this rise in the numbers that we have seen over the course of the past few months. And the government itself acknowledged that that is a reality. It's kind of one of the reasons why Title 42 has kind of been maintained in place, is because it has allowed the government to still kind of manage those traffic flows or those flows of migrants a little more easily than if they had to process them under the normal immigration authorities. And so the government acknowledges that since there's more people coming, they've been taking some preparations in order to, for that possibility. Part of that, of course, is a multi-government approach, because since they are unaccompanied minors, once they are in U.S. custody, they are automatically referred to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Refugee Resettlement there. They have an office that works particularly with unaccompanied minors and taking them into custody. And so that has been kind of a big effort for them to kind of boost the resources available, because they've acknowledged that they've seen those numbers increase. Just to share with you some statistics, according to the latest information that the government sent out from yesterday, they had approximately 430 children that were unaccompanied children that were in their custody, but they had approximately 11,500 who were in the custody of Health and Human Services. That's a very large number, but they've also, they've been working in trying to reduce the number of days that they keep the children in their custody, so that way they can either reunify them with family members in the United States or with other people who would be able to care for them.
Rafael, if I could jump in and talk about the personal aspect of this. We're talking a lot about numbers, which is certainly important, but you are a reporter working in Arizona, a state on the U.S.-Mexico border. In terms of the experiences of these migrant children at the border and at detention centers, can you kind of give us some insight into what they're dealing with?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I think we have to start with, the population of the waiting population of migrants in Mexico. I think because a lot of these families see no other way to get to the United States, many of them have opted to send their children by themselves. So they're choosing to separate themselves from their children in order to kind of get them into the United States, because there's that acknowledgement that as children, they will have perhaps an easier path, towards remaining into the country, or at least more of a guaranteed path than for their parents, who can be automatically turned away under the Title 42 restrictions. And so, once the children are in federal custody of the United States, there's a set of rules that the U.S. government has to follow. They are not allowed to keep them in these border facilities for more than 3 days before they then transfer them to Health and Human Services. However, when, as we've seen in past, instances when we had large numbers of families and children arriving. Sometimes, and it's very different, from different sites of the border. Here in Arizona, for example, the Yuma area has been the busiest border crossing, among the busiest among the entire country, and it's also one of the smallest in terms of like staff and resources that Border Patrol officials have there. And so they are, they face additional challenges and hurdles in trying to maintain or follow those rules and guidelines that determine, the care of children in custody. And when that does happen, whenever they are in custody for longer periods of time, there are certain, challenges or things that they can face. For example, in Yuma a couple of years ago, when we had a surge before the pandemic, in about 2018, 2019, there were children who were being held in these congregate settings, and some of them were victims to sexual assault, either by other minors in custody, or even by some of the agents. And there's investigations that have been done into that, but it's kind of adds more of the pressure that advocates are calling on the federal government to try to do more to ensure that the children are being adequately cared for.
Rafael, I wish we had a lot more time with you on this ongoing topic. Rafael Carranza, reporter with the Arizona Republic, thank you so much for your insight today.